Hey, thanks for stopping by. It's me, Will, and I'm back to brew us some shenanigans. Today our featured commander is the Boogie Woman of Dominaria, Braids, Arisen Nightmare. She's a 3-mana value 3/3 Nightmare that reads, at the beginning of our end step, we may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, planeswalker, basically any permanent, and if we do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it, and for each one who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and we draw a card. Giving our opponents a choice is usually a bad thing in Magic. We rarely really get what we want, but in this case, I've found Braids to be an absolute house. And the deck I've brewed today is something I call the Mono Black Dream. If you're a Mono Black player or you enjoy the black part of the color pie, this is gonna be perfect for you. Because we get to destroy things, bring things back, sack them, make people discard, use life as a resource, greatness at any cost. Now if you haven't dropped by before, my decks aren't focused on building the most powerful way possible, but instead focus on a jankier, more mid-power play group, and we also skip the staples and go straight into the meat. So if this sounds good, leave a like, hit the subscribe, because those things really help me out. So I'll go over our deck's themes of ramp, removal, and draw, then I'll go into our other themes of sacrifice, discard, black payoffs, and something we like to call UBP, or utilities, bombs, and pets. Even if we're running a low curve, I bring about 10 mana sources. Outside of rocks, I run cards like Dark Ritual, Soldelvi Adnate, and Bogwitch as burst mana sources, which can allow for explosive turns, especially in the early game. I've also found that Solemn Simulacrum is a good fit in this deck. I know it's fallen out of favor because it looks so vanilla, but it ramps, chump blocks, and it can be sacrificed for value when needed. It's like a creature that's a saga. Pawn of Ulamog and Pitiless Plunderer are a pair of mana sources that reward us when our things die, and they can get pretty nutty when we get our engines running. Now, if Pitiless Plunderer is outside your budget, perfectly understandable, Sifter of Skulls is another 4-mana value creature that can kinda do the same, although of course in a less broken way. Finally, Ashnod's Altar. Yeah, the card can be all types of broken, but we're actually playing this card fairly. Or at least as fair as it can be. Because even if it isn't here for like infinite loops and things like this, it's still a really strong card, especially in decks that like to sacrifice things. Now, as someone who plays black quite often, removal and interaction are some of my favorite things to do. Toxic Deluge is great, and eating creatures like Fleshbag, Plaguecrafter, yeah, these are solid, but a creature I like to run is Kumbaj Witches. Now don't laugh, this thing picks off a lot of powerful dorks. You can just bolt the bird while in black, or shoot that sentinel, And since we're playing a 4-player pod, we can even pick off 2 toughness creatures if we ask help from the right opponent. However, instant speed removal is great, and some of the cheapest costed ones are Slaughter Pact and Dismember. They hit out of nowhere and you can cast them for almost nothing. At the top end of our removal curve are Butcher of Malakir and Dictate of Erebos. These cards will allow us to dominate the board. We're sacrificing things and things like this, and while I generally stay away from Dictate, it's too good to pass up in this kind of deck. Now, if you aren't willing to invest in a Dictate, or you find it too oppressive, a budget alternative is Pestilence. It's one of my favorite cards of all time, and while it's not as good, it's still an enchantment that helps you control the board, and you can keep it alive for as long as you have a creature in play. Now for draw, we don't want to rely solely on Braids, even though she's very good at it. Ichor Wellspring and Deadly Dispute are good hand smoothing cards, and they give good value early. Skull Clamp, Midnight Reaper, Morbid Opportunist, and Ayara are good value engines that help us draw cards consistently throughout the game. For burst draw, Treacherous Blessing is an amazing card. 3 for 3 is an insanely good rate, and with Braids out we can even sacrifice it to avoid the downside. Odds are our opponents will be unable or unwilling to sacrifice their enchantments, and will usually end up drawing 6 in a turn. Siphon Mine is also a really good incremental value card in that it puts our opponents down a card while also drawing us 3. Now, Planeswalkers are usually tough to run in Commander, but I like both Lolth and Tevesh Sat for us. Lolth can defend herself, is a Phyrexian Arena when she's doing nothing, and since she grows pretty quick, she can be a way to help us close the game. And Sat just draws us so many cards, or can give us the sacrifice fodder we need. He also actually gets so much loyalty pretty quickly, so he's not that easy to take down. A lot of our cards so far have wanted for things to die, and so we need to make sure we have the fuel to keep that death engine going. So depending on your collection, take your pick among Cult Conscript, Nether Trader, Razor Lash Transmogrant, Reassembling Skeleton, Skyclave Shade, Gutterbones, Tenacious Underdog, Bloodsoaked Champion, or Bloodghast. These can all bring themselves back from the graveyard fairly reliably. I've packed about 6 of these in the deck, and if you want to know which ones I pick, here you go. I find that these are the most consistent in terms of mana value and recursion condition. Tokens, though, are another great way to make sure you have stuff to sacrifice. And Woe Strider brings a body, is a great sack engine, and in a pinch, can escape from our graveyard. Sitting at the top end of our curve, Chittering Witch and Grave Titan also bring a lot of bodies with them. Now, if Grave Titan is too pricey, the mini Grave Titan is Tainted Adversary. Not as consistent, but he can bring a lot of bodies as a mana sink. Now, Braids will draw us a ton of cards, and one way to press our advantage on that is to make sure our opponents are empty-handed, or at least close to it. Necrogen Mist and Oppression are relentless discard effects that, mixed in with our opponents regularly casting spells, will hopefully have them soon on top deck mode. Now, if Oppression is too pricey, or it's too oppressive, as the name says, Necrogoyf can be a budget or less oppressive alternative. Sprinkling more discard into the mix, Liliana Heretical Healer. We can flip her fairly easily, and she's also another source of consistent discard. Now, a card I run mostly for flavor is Raven Man. Flavorful to run with Lily, since, if I'm not mistaken, he was the one who helped ignite her spark. Vortices, please check me on this one. And while paying the 4 mana to activate his ability to force a discard is a little steep, his triggered ability can be pretty impressive. You know, as long as it's paired with the right discard engine, like a Necrogen Mist or a Necrogoyf, right? You could practically pump out one flyer every turn. You know, it's like having a coma, but in black. You know, except without the indestructible thing and things like this. Now, on to more powerful discard effects. Rankle and Painful Quandary are cards that hurt. Rankle is an evasive hasty creature, and he can force both discards and sacrifices, while Quandary tacks on incremental damage on top of the occasional discard. Finally, a boogeyman of the format, Mind Slicer. Yikes. So this is a bit of a tricky card to play, but with Braids, we're banking on that we can rebuild our hand much faster than our opponents. And if you don't like this card, that's fine, you can replace it with like a Bottomless Pit. Also pretty scary, and you can sacrifice the pit to Braids once it's hurting you more than your opponents. Now, lots of death, lots of discards, it's time to get some payoffs for all of our hard work. Aristocrat creatures in Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat, and Aristocrat enchantments in Agent of the Iron Throne and Bastion of Remembrance are key pieces that'll close out games for us. And new from the Phyrexia All Will Be One set is the powered down version of these cards in Vran Executioner Thane. The once per turn clause is a bit restricting, but this means we should be sacrificing our opponent's turns to get that extra bit of damage. Sir Conrad is typically a combo closer, and while we aren't running any infinites, he is still a terrific aristocrat piece on top of being a pinger when our opponents discard a creature, and also actually when we recur one of our sacrificial lambs from the graveyard. Outside of this whole aristocrat approach though, we can just outright murder somebody with Senjir the Dark Baron. He gets 2+1/+1 counters whenever any creature dies. Any, meaning even our opponents. Sure, he can get wrecked with a board wipe still or like spot removal, Swords to Plowshares, right? But he grows a lot faster than you think, and he can have enough power to close out an opponent in the late game. Finally, a couple of pricey options I run are Junji the Midnight Sky and Blood Chief Ascension. Now with Junji, I don't always go for the reanimation version. The discard mode is actually pretty good. You know, it hurts, man. And Blood Chief Ascension is a way to make discard and sacrifices hurt. It's a big effect for just 1 mana. Now if these are too pricey, budget alternatives would be Vindictive Vampire and Falconwrath Noble. You know, just more aristocrat pieces. They're a bit higher end on the curve than we'd like, but they're still solid cards and just good redundancy pieces. UBP time. Adding a bit of Graveyard Recursion in Phyrexian Reclamation, Victimized, and Gixian, Puppeteer give the deck a bit of resilience. It's not like the deck is super reliant on Braids, but it performs much better when she's out. Priestess of Forgotten Gods is a sleeper all-star in many of my decks, and it's no different here. She ramps, she removes, and she draws. Pretty much the holy trinity of what commander decks generally want to do as a baseline. Now Archfiend of the Draws and Yaheni also help us stabilize. Don't worry about the lose the game clause in the Archfiend, there are plenty of ways to sacrifice it before you kill yourself. But an undercosted 6/6 flyer, that's just great board presence, and the lose 2 life triggered ability is sometimes relevant, and when it is, wow, it does a lot of work. As for Yaheni, sacrifice outlet and an indestructible blocker. He survives wipes, at least most of them, and he can grow. I'm not expecting to close the game out with these cards, but they are great stopgaps. Down to my last 2 cards now for the deck, the first being Drivnod. Yes, the Phyrexian Horror Domini, and is actually a big reason why I wanted to build this mono black commander deck in the first place. I have the oil slick version and I wanted a home for it, so here it is. The perfect home for this mono black Dominai. Lots of death triggers without necessarily going for infinite combo loops, but he's still any powerful enough build to justify running his ability. And finally, this may be a controversial pick, Tergrid God of Salt. Now if you've never played against a Tergrid, this card can be incredibly oppressive. But I find that she's only the worst when she's always accessible in the command zone and when there's fast mana to get her down early. Otherwise, in the 99 with no tutors and no cheap reanimation spells, I'd say she's still powerful. Let's not, fool ourselves here. But she's nowhere near as game-endingly oppressive as like more powerful builds of her would be. And that's it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the build. I have a lot of fun piloting this deck, I have it on paper. It's the mono black dream without necessarily being just like black good stuff deck, But let me know what you think in the comments. And also, if you like me doing these like budget alternative things, like something new I'm trying out in this video, let me know too. I'd appreciate the feedback. Again, if you could leave a like and subscribe, and if you could share this with your friends, I'd really appreciate that too. So stay inspired, and I'll see you next time.